He had always loved the land. From the first day he stepped foot on the ranch. There was something about the wide open spaces, the smell of fresh earth, and the quiet rhythm of life that called to him. It wasn't just a piece of property to him. It was a home, a legacy, a place where every fence, every field, every barn told a story. His hands bore the marks of hard work. His face carried the lines of long days in the sun. And his heart carried the pride of someone who had built something with sweat and patience. He had inherited the ranch from his parents, who had inherited it from their parents before them. It was more than land. It was history, family, and a way of life that he cherished deeply. For years he had poured his energy into the ranch. He woke before the sun to tend the animals, check the fences, and plan the day. He worked through storms and scorching heat, through droughts and floods, and through the loneliness that sometimes came with life on a sprawling property. He celebrated small victories, like the birth of a healthy calf, a successful harvest, or a well-maintained field. He took pride in the fact that everything on the ranch thrived under his care. People in town admired his dedication, and visitors often remarked on the beauty of the land and the meticulousness of its upkeep. But those who admired rarely understood the effort, the worry, and the personal sacrifices it took to maintain it. He trusted people easily. He believed in fairness and honesty because that was how he had been raised. He trusted his lawyer, trusted his business partners, and trusted the people around him to act in good faith. That trust, he realized too late, had become a weakness. The legal world was complex, and not everyone who smiled at him had his best interests at heart. He had relied on others to handle some of the paperwork and management, believing that they shared his vision for the ranch. He never imagined that those he trusted would find ways to exploit loopholes, bend rules, and maneuver behind his back to take what was rightfully his. The first hint of trouble was subtle, almost invisible. Letters arrived with unfamiliar signatures, documents requiring his attention that seemed routine. He signed them without suspicion, thinking they were part of standard procedures, unaware that each signature was another thread being pulled from the foundation of his life. Meetings were scheduled that he believed were formalities, and advice came from people he thought were looking out for him. Each step seemed harmless, even necessary, until one day he realized that the ranch was no longer under his control. The shock hit him like a thunderclap. The place he had poured his life into, land that had been his family's for generations, had been handed away without his full knowledge. The legal documents, the contracts, the subtle manipulations had all aligned against him, leaving him powerless. He walked through the ranch in disbelief, his boots crunching on the dry soil, his eyes tracing the fences and barns that he had built with his own hands. Every corner of the land was filled with memories, moments of joy, struggle, and triumph. And yet, it now felt like a stranger's place. The betrayal was not just legal, it was personal. The people he had trusted, the people who smiled and nodded as he worked, had orchestrated this behind his back. He felt a deep, aching anger. But more than that, he felt a hollow emptiness, a sense of loss that went beyond the physical property. This was the life he had known, the future he had envisioned, and suddenly, it had been taken away. Neighbors came to check on him, offering sympathy and concern. They shook their heads in disbelief, unable to understand how such a thing could happen in their quiet town. Some tried to offer advice, others shared stories of similar betrayals, but nothing could erase the sting of what had been done. Friends and family expressed sorrow, but the protagonist realized that sorrow alone would not help him. He had to find a way to respond, to reclaim not just the land, but the respect and dignity that had been stripped from him. He knew the path would be difficult, that the law was complex, and that he would need patience, strategy, and resilience. He spent nights awake in his small home on the edge of the ranch, staring at the ceiling and replaying the events that had led to this moment. He thought about every document he had signed, every meeting he had attended, every moment he had trusted the wrong person. He felt the weight of years of work slipping through his fingers. But alongside the grief and frustration, a quiet determination began to grow. If they thought they could take his ranch and walk away unchallenged, they were wrong. He would not act rashly. He would plan carefully, gather evidence, and find every possible legal ethical, and strategic avenue to reclaim what was his. This was not just about property. It was about justice, pride, and the principle that hard work and integrity should not be punished. As days turned into weeks, he began the painstaking process of understanding exactly how he had been deceived. He reviewed every contract, letter, and document with meticulous attention, often late into the night. He consulted with experts quietly, learning the intricacies of property law and the weaknesses in the claims made against him. Every small revelation fueled his resolve. He realized that while the betrayal had been devastating, it had also left traces of arrogance and oversight from those who had taken his ranch. They had moved too quickly, confident in their scheme, and in their overconfidence lay the seeds of their undoing. While the town assumed he was defeated, he worked in silence, laying the groundwork for a response that would be measured but unrelenting. He reconnected with old friends who had knowledge of law and finance, seeking advice and support without revealing the full scope of his plans. He spent time walking the ranch, observing its current state, noting changes and weaknesses that could become opportunities. He listened to the land itself, the rhythm of the animals, the sound of wind through the trees, drawing strength from the place that had always been his anchor. Each morning he rose, he reminded himself of why he was fighting, not out of greed, but out of love, pride, and justice. The initial shock of betrayal slowly transformed into a focused determination. He began to visualize the steps he would need to take, the resources he would gather, and the patience required to turn the situation in his favor. He knew it would not be quick, that it would require discipline and restraint, but he was willing to endure whatever was necessary. The fire inside him was no longer just anger, it was clarity. He had been knocked down, but he refused to stay down. The ranch was part of his identity, and he would do everything in his power to reclaim it, in the quiet moments. He allowed himself to feel the pain, the anger, and the sense of loss. He didn't try to suppress it because he understood that acknowledgement was the first step toward moving forward. He wrote down his thoughts, his memories of the ranch, and his plans for the future, turning emotion into strategy. The betrayal had wounded him deeply, but it had also awakened a strategic mind, one that could see opportunities where others only saw obstacles. He was no longer the naive rancher who trusted too easily. He was becoming a careful planner, an observer, a person who understood that every action had consequences, and every decision mattered. As the sun set over the ranch, casting long shadows across the fields, he felt a quiet sense of purpose. The journey ahead would be difficult, filled with legal battles, strategic maneuvers, and emotional challenges. But he was ready. The ranch had been taken from him, yes, but he had not been broken. His love for the land, his respect for hard work, and his determination to see justice done had never been stronger. He knew that the road to reclaiming the ranch would test him in ways he had never imagined. But he also knew that it was a path he had to take. The betrayal had set the stage, but the story was far from over. And in the quiet of the evening, surrounded by the land he had always called home, he made a silent promise to himself. He would not rest until the ranch was back in his hands, and until the perfect revenge was his to claim. After the initial shock of losing the ranch, he retreated from the world. The days were quiet, almost eerily so. The town continued its usual rhythm, but for him, time seemed to move differently. Every familiar sound, the lowing of the cattle, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the distant call of birds reminded him of what had been taken. Yet in that quiet, he began to think clearly. Anger still simmered, but it was now accompanied by focus. He knew that acting recklessly would only ruin any chance of reclaiming what was his. Patience, he realized, was as crucial as strength. He began to gather information. He spent hours poring over documents he had once signed without much thought. Each page was a puzzle piece, each clause a potential clue. What had seemed straightforward now revealed layers of complexity. He reread contracts, financial statements, and legal papers, searching for anything that might expose errors or oversights made by those who had taken the ranch. It was painstaking work, requiring a patience he hadn't known he possessed. Some nights he would sit at the kitchen table with a single lamp, his eyes tired but his mind sharp, tracing the lines on documents and marking every detail that seemed suspicious. He realized that he couldn't do everything alone. He needed guidance, support, and expertise. Quietly, without drawing attention, he reached out to people he trusted. An old friend who had worked in law, former ranch hand with knowledge of the property's history, and a retired accountant with a reputation for spotting errors, all became part of his quiet circle of advisors. He met them in private, shared the details cautiously, and listened carefully to their advice. They didn't promise miracles, but they helped him see angles he hadn't considered and reminded him that slow, careful planning often won battles faster than anger and confrontation. At the same time, he studied the new owners from a distance. They had taken over with confidence, assuming that once they held the papers, nothing could challenge their claim. They made mistakes in their management, overlooked important regulations, and underestimated the strength of the person they had wronged. Each small misstep was a chance for him to prepare, to strengthen his position, and to ensure that when he acted, it would be with precision. He watched quietly, never making a move that could reveal his intentions. Patience became a weapon, and silence a shield. He also learned the importance of understanding public opinion. People in town knew something had happened, and while many sympathized, rumors and half-truths began to spread. He realized that controlling the narrative, or at least ensuring it was fair and accurate, would be important. A journalist he had met years ago, someone he trusted to tell stories honestly, became a silent ally. He shared information carefully, planting seeds that could later support his claims. This was not about revenge through public shaming, but about ensuring that truth and fairness were part of the process. Information handled wisely could be as powerful as any legal argument. Every day, he spent time walking the ranch, observing it as if seeing it for the first time. He noted the changes made, the areas neglected, and the small ways the land itself responded to different hands. He took photographs, kept detailed notes, and created mental maps of opportunities and risks. This was not just research. It was a way to reconnect with the land, to remember what he was fighting for, and to draw strength from the place itself. The ranch had given him everything: life lessons, resilience, pride, and now it was giving him the fuel to plan his next steps. In the evenings, he would sit by the window, sipping coffee, and think about the long road ahead. There were legal battles to fight, documents to challenge, and strategies to implement. He could feel the weight of every choice he had made and every choice he would make in the future. Each decision mattered more than ever, and he reminded himself to move deliberately. Impatience could ruin everything. He had seen people lose battles not because they lacked skill, but because they acted too quickly. He refused to make that mistake. His resolve became sharper with each passing day. He also took time to reflect on himself. The betrayal had been painful, but it had also revealed aspects of his own character he had not fully recognized. He was more resourceful than he had imagined, more patient than he thought, and capable of focusing on long-term goals rather than immediate satisfaction. He discovered a side of himself that thrived under challenge, could plan with clarity, and that could endure uncertainty without losing hope. The ranch had taught him many things, but this experience was teaching him even more about resilience and strategy. Throughout this period, he maintained his daily routines. He still tended to animals, checked fences, and cared for the land that was technically no longer his. The work kept him grounded and reminded him of the life he was reclaiming. It also allowed him to observe the new owner's management from a close but careful distance. He noted every shortcut they took, every mistake they made, and every opportunity that could be leveraged in the future. Patience and observation became his tools. As vital as any lawyer or financial expert, he never let frustration cloud his judgment. While anger still flared occasionally, he learned to channel it into focus and meticulous preparation. Every time he felt the urge to confront, yell, or act impulsively, he reminded himself that the real power lay in planning and precision. He understood that revenge was not about immediate gratification. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully his, in a way that was thorough, undeniable, and lasting. Each small step he took, Each piece of information he gathered brought him closer to that ultimate goal. Over time, he began to draft a detailed plan. It included legal strategies, documentation review, public awareness, and careful financial maneuvers. He imagined scenarios, anticipated obstacles, and considered contingencies. Each element of the plan was built on knowledge, observation, and patience. He was no longer reacting to the betrayal. He was preparing to act in a way that would ensure success. His vision became clearer with each day, and the fire inside him burned brighter. Tempered by intelligence and strategy, the quiet work, the late nights, the careful research, it all began to form a solid foundation. He felt more in control than he had since the initial shock. The ranch was still his, in every sense that mattered, even if the papers said otherwise. He reminded himself that justice was not always immediate, but when it arrived, it was powerful and undeniable. The patience he had cultivated, the knowledge he had gained, and the alliances he had formed were all pieces of a puzzle that, once completed, would restore not just the ranch, but his pride and dignity, even in solitude. He found moments of connection and inspiration. He spoke with the animals, tended the land, and reflected on the legacy he wanted to preserve. Each sunrise brought new clarity, and each evening reinforced his commitment. He could feel the tide turning, not through force, but through careful, deliberate action. The ranch had been taken, but he had not been defeated. The planning phase was where his true strength would show in strategy, patience, and careful execution. He knew there would be challenges ahead. Legal battles would be long, obstacles would appear, and the emotional toll would be heavy. But he also knew that he had prepared better than most people could imagine. Every moment of careful observation, every discussion with trusted allies, every late night spent reviewing documents, all of it was laying the groundwork for eventual success. He had transformed from a shocked victim into a patient strategist, a man who understood that careful planning could turn even the most painful betrayal into a victory as the weeks passed. He continued to refine his plan. He tracked the actions of the new owners, documented every misstep, and ensured that no detail was overlooked. He continued to meet with his small circle of advisors who provided insight and guidance without ever taking control. He became disciplined, focused, and precise. Recognizing that the smallest advantage could make the difference in the long run, every day he grew more confident that the ranch would one day be his again. Not just through luck or emotion, but through careful, deliberate effort. In the stillness of the night, he allowed himself brief moments of hope. He pictured walking across the fields once more, the sun warming his back, the smell of earth in the air, and the satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served. These moments reminded him why he was enduring the long, difficult process. The ranch was more than land. It was life, history, and identity. Each step he took in planning and preparation brought him closer to reclaiming all of it. He knew the road ahead would test him in ways he could not yet imagine. But he also knew that the foundation he was building now would make the ultimate victory possible. The betrayal had started a fire, and now it was his guiding light. Months passed. He moved quietly, carefully, like a shadow in the corners of the ranch he had once called his own. Every day brought small discoveries, small openings that could later become powerful tools in his plan. He observed the new owners closely, noting their routines, the way they handled the land, and the errors they overlooked. Their confidence was their weakness. They assumed ownership meant they could act without consequence, and that arrogance allowed him to gather evidence, understand their missteps, and prepare for the moment when he would act. He had learned patience in ways he never imagined. It was not the kind of patience that comes from boredom or waiting idly. It was active patience, the kind that requires focus, constant observation, and strategic thinking. He spent long hours walking the fields, examining fences, noting areas of neglect, and thinking about how the land responded to different care. He photographed everything, made detailed notes, and compared each change to how the ranch had been under his management. Every small discrepancy was a piece of the puzzle, a potential leverage point that could strengthen his position when the time came. He also strengthened the quiet network of allies who had agreed to help him. The old lawyer he trusted provided insight into legal gaps and potential claims that could challenge the new ownership. The retired accountant helped track financial discrepancies, uncovering oversights in management and taxes that the new owners had ignored. The journalist, discreetly informed, was ready to tell the story if public attention became necessary. Each ally operated quietly, respecting his wishes to keep the plan hidden until the right moment. There was no rush. Timing would be everything. While he worked in silence, he never neglected the emotional aspect of the challenge. He allowed himself moments of reflection, connecting with the memories embedded in the land. He remembered the first time he rode across the fields as a child, the lessons his parents had taught him about hard work, and the pride that came from caring for the ranch through good times and bad. These memories became fuel, reminding him why the effort was worth it, why the patience mattered, and why justice was not just about reclaiming property, but about restoring dignity and pride every day. He monitored the new owner's actions with precision. He saw how they took shortcuts, ignored regulations, and failed to maintain the property properly. Each small mistake added to the growing evidence that their management was flawed. He knew that eventually those mistakes could not be ignored. By quietly documenting every error, he was building a foundation for a case that would be difficult to dispute. He understood that victory would not come from confrontation, but from careful, undeniable proof. At the same time he was preparing his financial strategy, he began to acquire small parcels of land adjacent to the ranch quietly, ensuring that he could influence key areas and create leverage. Every purchase was deliberate, calculated, and done without drawing attention. He thought years ahead, planning contingencies, and creating options that could strengthen his eventual reclaiming of the ranch. He understood that physical control of certain areas could create pressure, influence negotiations, and build a stronger position without ever resorting to aggression. He also observed the community's perception. Townspeople were curious, sometimes whispering rumors, but he never responded publicly. He learned that appearances mattered. He wanted his narrative to be built on facts, not gossip. The journalist in a circle would ensure that the story of the ranch, the betrayal, and his careful approach could eventually be shared with fairness and clarity. This quiet management of perception was just as critical as any legal or strategic action. The new owners had underestimated the importance of careful observation and public sentiment, and he planned to use that oversight to his advantage. His daily routines remained grounded in the ranch's needs: feeding the animals, maintaining fences, inspecting irrigation systems. He continued these tasks with the same care he always had. These routines were more than work. They were a connection to the land and a reminder of his purpose. Each day spent tending the ranch reinforced his understanding of its value, both practical and emotional. The land itself seemed to respond to his presence, as if recognizing its rightful caretaker. Giving him renewed strength and clarity, he also practiced restraint. At times, the temptation to confront the new owners, to express anger, or to take impulsive action was strong. But he reminded himself that true strategy required calm, methodical execution. He learned to turn anger into focus, frustration into careful observation, and impatience into preparation. Each day was an exercise in discipline, a reminder that slow, deliberate action would yield a far more powerful outcome than any rash decision. During this period, he discovered strengths he hadn't realized he possessed. The betrayal had forced him to think strategically, to plan long-term, and to anticipate moves ahead of time. He became a keen observer, able to detect subtle patterns and weaknesses. He also learned the importance of alliances, trust, and selective communication. Not everyone needed to know his plans, only those who could help him. This selective sharing increased the effectiveness of his actions and reduced the risk of interference. Every small lesson, every new skill he developed, added to the arsenal he would eventually use to reclaim the ranch. As the weeks became months, he built a mental timeline, imagining the sequence of actions that would eventually lead to reclaiming the property. He considered legal challenges, financial maneuvers, public awareness strategies, and the physical reclamation of the land. Each scenario was carefully thought out, with contingencies for unexpected setbacks. He practiced patience in action, knowing that each small, invisible step was building toward a greater, undeniable outcome. The process itself became a form of empowerment, transforming his initial despair into focused capability. He also prepared emotionally for the final confrontation. He understood that reclaiming the ranch would not be simple, that it would require persistence, resilience, and mental strength. He envisioned moments of tension, legal scrutiny, and negotiation. He prepared himself to remain calm and strategic under pressure. By mentally rehearsing these challenges, he ensured that when the moment arrived, he would respond with confidence and clarity, not impulsive emotion. The betrayal had tested his spirit, but he had strengthened it in the process. He stayed connected to the land through observation and care. The ranch had a rhythm, a subtle language, and he listened attentively. He noticed changes in soil, water flow, and animal behavior. Understanding how small mismanagement could create larger issues, every insight became a tool, allowing him to anticipate outcomes and make informed decisions. This deep, intimate knowledge of the land was more than practical. It was symbolic of his bond with the property and a reminder of what was at stake. The new owners continued their mistakes, oblivious to the careful, invisible strategy unfolding around them. Their overconfidence made them blind to the vulnerabilities they created. He quietly documented every misstep, preparing for a moment when these errors would strengthen his case. By acting indirectly, by letting their own arrogance create opportunities, he positioned himself for a decisive, undeniable victory. The strategy was invisible, patient, and precise, the perfect counter to their reckless assumption of control. As the seasons changed, he observed the land with renewed attention. He tracked crop growth, animal behavior, and infrastructure maintenance. Noting both successes and failures under the new management, each observation was recorded, analyzed, and considered in the broader context of his plan. Patience had become a habit, and observation had become a tool. He understood that victory would come not from confrontation, but from preparation, strategy, and timing. Through this quiet work, he developed a sense of calm confidence. He was no longer the victim of betrayal. He was a strategist, a planner, and a caretaker, building the foundation for a return to the ranch that was inevitable. Each day brought him closer, each observation, document, and connection adding to the strength of his eventual claim. He had transformed his despair into focused action, his anger into strategy, and his loss into a roadmap for success. By the end of this period, he had positioned himself for the moment when the plan would move from preparation to execution. He had gathered evidence, strengthened his alliances, monitored the new owners, and deepened his knowledge of the land. He had cultivated patience, discipline, and focus. He had learned that true power lay not in immediate action or reaction, but in careful observation, thoughtful planning, and unwavering commitment. The stage was set, and the pieces were in place. The ranch would return to its rightful owner, not through luck, not through force, but through careful, deliberate, and intelligent action. The quiet execution of his plan was underway, and the time for the final act was approaching. The perfect revenge was no longer a dream. It was a carefully orchestrated reality, waiting for the right moment to unfold. After months of careful observation, research, and planning, the moment had arrived. Every small piece of evidence he had gathered, every note, photograph, and record had come together to form a strong case. The mistakes of the new owners, their neglect, their shortcuts, and their overconfidence, all now worked in his favor. He knew that patience had been his greatest weapon, and now it was time to use it. He began by meeting with his lawyer to review every detail one last time. The lawyer, who had been by his side throughout the planning process, confirmed that the documents were solid, the claims were undeniable, and the strategy was airtight. They discussed the approach carefully, anticipating potential arguments from the opposing side and preparing counters. Nothing was left to chance. Every step was deliberate, calculated, and designed to ensure that the case would be resolved in his favor. The lawyer reminded him that the legal process might be slow, but with the evidence and preparation they had, there was no doubt about the outcome. Next, He took steps to involve the public in a careful and controlled way. The journalist he trusted began to write about the history of the ranch, the dedication of its rightful owner, and the irregularities in the transfer of ownership. The story highlighted hard work, integrity, and the betrayal that had taken place without appearing vindictive. It drew attention, but in a measured way, ensuring that public sympathy leaned toward justice rather than drama. Letters from neighbors, photos from past events, stories of the ranch's importance were shared subtly, all building a sense of fairness and highlighting the truth of the situation. Meanwhile, he continued his quiet work on the ranch itself. Although he technically no longer owned it, he maintained small portions, ensuring that the land remained healthy and cared for. He repaired fences, tended to animals, and kept the fields in good condition. Each action reinforced his connection to the land and demonstrated his responsibility and expertise. It also allowed him to observe the new owner's mismanagement firsthand, which added further evidence to support his case. The ranch responded to his care, thriving even in small sections. While the neglected areas under the new owners, control began to show the consequences of inattention. Legal proceedings began quietly but steadily. Documents were filed, hearings scheduled, and evidence presented. Each step of the process was methodical, supported by the months of preparation and observation. The new owners, who had assumed they would never be challenged, were forced to confront the errors they had made and the evidence that had been meticulously collected against them. The courtroom became a place where the truth could no longer be ignored, where careful documentation and patient strategy outweighed arrogance and deceit. He remained calm throughout, never allowing emotion to interfere with his methodical approach. During this time, he also worked on the financial aspects. The small parcels of land he had acquired quietly over the months became leverage in negotiations. He had positioned himself strategically, ensuring that he had options whether the legal proceedings took longer than expected or if other opportunities arose. Every purchase, every financial move, had been carefully calculated to strengthen his eventual claim and protect his interests. He watched quietly as the new owners realized that they had underestimated his foresight and preparation. As the case progressed, he remained humble, patient, and focused. He did not seek revenge in the form of humiliation or anger. His goal was the restoration of what was rightfully his, and every step he took was designed to achieve that objective in a way that was undeniable and fair. He continued to walk the land, observing the effects of his care versus the neglect of the new owners. Each day reinforced his belief that the truth would prevail and that his quiet, disciplined strategy would bring the outcome he sought. Finally, after months of careful work and legal scrutiny, the decision was made. The evidence he had collected, the meticulous preparation, and the clear documentation of mismanagement and oversight could not be ignored. The court recognized the validity of his claims, the errors of the new owners, and the integrity of his ownership. The ranch was restored to him, legally and morally, and the new owners had no choice but to relinquish control. It was a moment of quiet triumph, the result of patience, strategy, and careful observation rather than impulsive action. He walked across the fields, feeling the familiar soil beneath his boots, the sun on his face, and the wind through the trees. Everything he had endured, the shock, the anger, the months of planning and observation, had led to this moment. He did not celebrate with grand gestures or loud declarations. Instead, he felt a deep, calm satisfaction, a sense of justice restored, and dignity regained. The ranch was his again, not because of luck or chance, but because of careful, deliberate action and unwavering commitment. Neighbors and friends came to offer congratulations, many of them expressing admiration for his patience and determination. They had watched him endure the betrayal quietly, without public complaints or impulsive actions, and now they saw the result. The ranch was not just a piece of land. It was a testament to resilience, intelligence, and the power of careful planning. He shared stories of the process, not to boast, but to inspire others about the importance of patience, observation, and methodical action in overcoming adversity. he also reflected on the lessons learned from the experience. He realized that true strength is not always about immediate action or confrontation, but about patience, strategy, and careful preparation. He had discovered resilience, discipline, and strategic thinking within himself, qualities that would serve him well in the future. The betrayal had been painful, but it had also revealed his capacity to endure, adapt, and prevail. He understood that justice was not just about reclaiming property, but about demonstrating integrity, foresight, and determination. The ranch itself responded to his return. Fields that had been neglected slowly regained their vitality under his care. Animals thrived, fences were repaired, and the land regained the harmony that had once defined it. Each improvement was a reminder of the connection he had always had with the land, and the satisfaction of restoring it to its proper state was profound. He worked tirelessly, not out of obligation, but out of love for the place and a desire to honor the legacy of his family. He continued to maintain relationships with those who had helped him throughout the process. The lawyer, the retired accountant, and the journalist remained trusted allies, their contributions invaluable to the successful outcome. He expressed gratitude quietly, recognizing that collaboration, trust, and careful communication had been essential. The experience reinforced his belief that strategic alliances, built on trust and shared goals, could make a significant difference in achieving complex objectives in the weeks that followed. He focused on strengthening the ranch for the future. He implemented new safeguards to prevent similar situations from arising again, reviewing contracts carefully, updating legal documents, and ensuring that management practices were transparent and secure. He also began mentoring younger ranchers in the community, sharing his experience and emphasizing the importance of diligence, observation, and long-term planning. The lessons learned from betrayal became lessons in resilience, strategy, and justice for others. Though the journey had been long and challenging, he felt a sense of peace and accomplishment. The perfect revenge had been achieved, not through aggression or retaliation, but through patience, preparation, and unwavering focus. He had restored his property, his dignity, and his pride. The land was alive with promise, reflecting the care, attention, and respect he had always given it. The ranch was more than a place to live or work. It was a testament to perseverance, intelligence, and the enduring power of careful, deliberate action. As he watched the sunset over the fields, he felt a deep connection to everything he had worked for and everything he had endured. The betrayal had tested him in every way, but it had also strengthened him, revealing qualities he might never have discovered otherwise. He understood that the journey itself, with all its challenges and lessons, was as important as the victory. The ranch was restored, and with it came a sense of closure, satisfaction, and the knowledge that true perseverance always finds its reward. The perfect revenge had been achieved, quietly, methodically, and undeniably, leaving a story of resilience, patience, and ultimate triumph that would be remembered for years to come. With the ranch finally restored to him, he felt a quiet sense of triumph that was deeper than any he had ever known. It was not loud or boastful, but steady, calm, and profoundly satisfying. Every inch of the land, every fence, every field, every tree and pasture was now under his care once again. He had not only reclaimed a property, but he had also reclaimed a piece of his life, a symbol of his perseverance, and the proof that patience, intelligence, and determination could overcome betrayal. He spent the first few days walking the property slowly, deliberately. Each step across the soil reminded him of the years he had spent nurturing it, the sacrifices he had made, and the challenges he had endured. The ranch had been through neglect, but it still held the strength and vitality that came from generations of careful stewardship. He examined the fields, checked the fences, and tended to the animals, feeling the bond with the land strengthen with every action. This was more than work. It was a celebration of restoration, quiet acknowledgement of all he had accomplished, though he was satisfied with the legal victory. He also knew that true success came from maintaining the land, protecting it and ensuring its prosperity for the future. He immediately began implementing safeguards that would prevent similar betrayals from happening again. Contracts were updated, records were carefully organized, and management practices were made transparent. He also shared his knowledge with trusted family and friends, ensuring that the ranch would remain protected even when he was not present. Every action was a layer of security, a reminder that vigilance and careful planning were as important as hard work. During this time, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The betrayal had been a painful, humbling experience, yet it had also been a teacher. He had learned to observe closely, think strategically, and act with patience. He had discovered strengths he never knew he possessed, and he had developed a resilience that would serve him well in every aspect of life. The ranch was more than a victory. It was proof that even the deepest setbacks could be overcome through careful, deliberate action. Neighbors and community members noticed the transformation. They saw a man who had endured betrayal with dignity, who had prepared quietly and thoughtfully, and who had reclaimed his rightful place without malice or impulsiveness. Many were inspired, asking questions about how he had managed to achieve what seemed impossible. He shared lessons carefully, emphasizing the importance of patience, careful observation, and planning over immediate reaction. His story became a quiet beacon of hope for others facing challenges, showing that persistence and strategy often mattered more than force or anger. He also took time to strengthen relationships with those who had helped him. The lawyer, the accountant, and the journalist who had supported him throughout the ordeal were acknowledged with gratitude. They had been allies in the truest sense, providing guidance, expertise, and support without ever taking control. Their contributions had been invaluable, and he recognized that collaboration, trust, and careful communication had been essential to the successful restoration of the ranch. Beyond practical matters, he allowed himself moments to connect emotionally with the land. Sitting on a fence at sunset, listening to the wind through the trees, observing the animals grazing peacefully, he felt a profound sense of belonging. The ranch was alive in a way that went beyond physical ownership. It was a place that had shaped him, tested him, and ultimately strengthened him. The journey had been long and difficult, but it reaffirmed the values he held dear: patience, integrity, perseverance. He also considered the legacy of the ranch. It was not just a place for him, but a heritage for future generations. He began to document his experiences, create detailed records, and establish protocols to ensure the ranch remained protected and prosperous for years to come. This was about more than personal victory. It was about stewardship, responsibility, and the continuation of a family legacy that had endured for generations. He wanted the ranch to thrive, not only because it was his, but because it represented the culmination of hard work, integrity, and enduring care. As weeks turned into months, he continued to restore every aspect of the ranch. Fields were cultivated with renewed care, fences repaired and reinforced, water systems maintained, and animals tended with meticulous attention. The land responded, growing stronger and more productive under his care. Each improvement reinforced the sense that justice had been served, not through anger or revenge, but through methodical action, knowledge, and care. The ranch had been reclaimed fully, and it was thriving once more. He also began to mentor younger ranchers in the community. He shared insights about the importance of careful planning, legal awareness, and observation in managing property and protecting one's assets. He told stories of patience, strategic thinking, and persistence, emphasizing that setbacks were not failures, but opportunities to learn and grow. His experience became a teaching moment for others, a living example of resilience and careful action in the face of betrayal in his personal life. He found a renewed sense of confidence and inner strength. The experience had tested him in every way, but it had also revealed his capacity for endurance, strategy, and calm decision-making under pressure. He had faced betrayal, despair, and frustration, yet he emerged stronger, more capable, and more grounded. The lessons he had learned extended far beyond the ranch, shaping his approach to life, work, and relationships. He understood that true power lay not in force or aggression, but in preparation, patience, and deliberate Informed action, community events and gatherings became opportunities to celebrate the ranch's restoration quietly. Friends and neighbors noticed the vitality returning to the fields, the well-cared-for animals, and the improvements to the property. They recognized the patience, discipline, and care that had led to this outcome. Yet he remained humble, knowing that the journey had been as important as the victory. Each day, each effort, and each thoughtful decision had contributed to the restoration of both the land and his sense of justice.